Hey there. So, let's talk about something super frustrating, that check engine light. You did everything right, you scanned the code, it said oxygen sensor, so you replaced it. And bam, the light is right back on. It's enough to make you want to pull your hair out. But stick with me. There's a totally logical reason for this, and we're going to figure it out. If this is you, trust me, you are not alone. This is probably one of the most common rabbit holes people fall into. You've spent the time, you've spent the money, and you're right back where you started. But what if I told you the problem isn't the shiny new part you just installed? That's right. The chances of getting a brand new quality O2 sensor that's bad right out of the box are, well, they're incredibly small. The real issue is that the sensor was never the actual problem. It was just the messenger trying to tell you something. And this, right here, this is the key. This changes everything. A fault code points to a problem area, not just a single part you need to replace. Your O2 sensor is actually doing its job perfectly. It's seeing a problem somewhere else in your engine system and reporting it. Our job isn't to shoot the messenger, it's to actually listen to what it has to say. So to figure out what that message is, we're going to have to put on our detective hats. Here's our game plan. First, we'll establish why the sensor isn't lying. Then we'll look for accomplices by checking for other codes. After that, we'll check the wiring, inspect the scene of the crime, the exhaust system, and analyze the whole air and fuel situation. And finally, we'll wrap it up with the right mindset for tackling any diagnosis. All right, let's start with our number one witness, the O2 sensor. You have to think of it as a really reliable observer with a front row seat to everything happening in your exhaust. It has absolutely no reason to make things up. So its entire job, all day long, is to measure how much oxygen is left over after the fuel burns in the engine. It zaps that info over to the car's computer, which then fine-tunes the air-to-fuel mix to keep everything running perfectly. So when that mix is off, the sensor does its job and throws up a flag. The key here is that the sensor is flagging a symptom, not the actual disease. Okay, so the first step in any good investigation is to see if our witness was working with anyone else. An O2 sensor code very rarely acts alone, so checking for other trouble codes is by far the fastest way to get a solid lead on the real problem. And this shows you exactly what I mean. Let's say you see an O2 code, but it's got a friend with it, a P0101. Well, your investigation should immediately shift over to the mass airflow or MAP sensor. That's the thing measuring all the air coming into the engine. Or, another classic example, you get a P0420 code. That's your brand new downstream O2 sensor telling you, clear as day, that your catalytic converter is probably toast. These other codes are the accomplices that blow the whole case wide open. All right, but what if there are no other codes? What if the O2 sensor is the only one talking? Well, our next step is to make sure its message is even getting through properly. We've got to investigate its communication line, the electrical circuit. First things first, just double-check that the original code was cleared from the computer. Sometimes it's that simple. Then you gotta get under there and really look at the wiring harness. It lives a tough life. You're looking for anything obvious, wires melted on the hot exhaust, frayed from road debris, or even, and I'm not kidding, chewed on by rodents. Next, pop open your fuse box. Look for a fuse labeled something like AF heater. That's for the O2 sensor's heater circuit. And if it's blown, the sensor can't work right. And finally, that circuit might have a relay that could have gone bad too. Okay, so the wiring looks good. Now we need to investigate the sensor's immediate neighborhood, and that's the exhaust system itself. A problem here can easily trick the sensor into sending a false report. The two biggest troublemakers here are leaks and clogs. If there's an exhaust leak before the O2 sensor, it's going to suck in fresh air from the outside. That fresh air tricks the sensor into thinking the engine is running lean. A great pro tip is to listen for a little ticking sound when the engine is cold. That's often a dead giveaway for a leak. Then you have clogs. A plugged-up catalytic converter can trap exhaust gases, which completely throws off the sensor's readings. You can check for this with a simple infrared temp gun. The pipe on the way out of the converter should be a lot hotter than the pipe going in. So, if the electrical circuit is fine and the exhaust system checks out, we move on to the number one most common cause of a stubborn O2 sensor code, the air and fuel mixture itself. The sensor is reporting a problem because guess what? There is a problem with what's going into your engine. And this usually breaks down into two main scenarios. First, you could be running lean. That just means too much air or not enough fuel. This is usually caused by a vacuum leak, some unmeasured air sneaking into the engine through a cracked hose or a bad gasket. The O2 sensor sees all that extra oxygen and reports it with codes like P0171 or P0174. On the flip side, you could be running rich, which means too much fuel. This could be from a leaky fuel injector or the fuel pressure being too high. A big symptom here is you'll often smell raw gas from the exhaust. The sensor will report this with codes like P0172 or P0175. So this is your new most wanted list. Instead of buying another O2 sensor, you should be hunting for vacuum leaks. Just listening for a hissing sound around the engine is a good start. You should be cleaning or testing your MAF sensor, and you should be looking at your fuel injectors and checking your fuel pressure. 9 times out of 10, this is where the real problem is hiding. You know, all of this really brings us to the single most important takeaway. To actually solve these frustrating problems, you have to stop thinking like a part swapper and really start thinking like a detective. So this is the new game plan. First, get the exact code, not just an O2 sensor code, but the specific number. Then use that code's description as your very first clue. If you have a decent scanner, look at the live data and see what the sensor is actually doing in real time. And most importantly, always remember, the code is the start of your diagnosis, not the end. The part named in the code is just your first witness, not your final suspect. So the next time you see that check engine light staring back at you, don't just ask what part is broken. Instead, ask yourself this: what story is my car trying to tell me? Because the answer, it's always there. You just have to know how to listen. Thanks for hanging out with me.